And today, the Supreme Court has answered that question by a vote of 6-3.
The U.S. Supreme Court has just issued a major ruling.
Major Second Amendment case.
Major Supreme Court ruling.
The Supreme Court just redrew the line on gun seizures. Picture law enforcement walking into your home without any warrant and confiscating your firearms. No charges filed, no crisis situation. Simply a judgment made on ambiguous safety concerns. That scenario might seem unconstitutional, but it almost became routine procedure until this moment. In a stunning unanimous 9-0 decision, the Supreme Court just established new boundaries on how far authorities can reach when confiscating firearms. And the aftermath could impact every gun owner across America. In this breakdown, we reveal what the justices actually decided and why it's critical. How does this verdict connect to previous Second Amendment victories? Which jurisdictions face potential legal challenges next? Plus, the fresh constitutional standards on warrantless home intrusion and firearm removal, and why the ripple effects of this ruling are already spreading. Welcome to Law Advisor. Hit that like button and subscribe to stay informed on the battle for your rights. Chapter 1. The case that ignited a constitutional fight. The genesis of this pivotal ruling stems from the case Caniglia versus Strom, which presented pressing constitutional dilemmas. Back in 2015, Edward Caniglia had a heated dispute with his wife in Rhode Island. Worried about his psychological condition, she contacted law enforcement the following day, who showed up and convinced Caniglia to accept a mental health assessment. But authorities then walked into his residence without authorization and confiscated 2 handguns. Key points. Police justified their actions under a community caretaking rationale. No criminal offense occurred and no immediate threat existed. The weapons were removed without warrant, arrest, or permission. Caniglia filed suit, claiming an obvious Fourth Amendment breach. The case moved through judicial levels for years. Lower tribunals supported law enforcement, but when the Supreme Court accepted the case, the landscape transformed entirely. Their unanimous verdict reestablished the sanctity of the home as constitutionally inviolable. Chapter 2. The Supreme Court's unanimous verdict decoded. In May 2021, the United States Supreme Court delivered a 9-0 unanimous judgment rejecting the application of community caretaking principles to authorize warrantless residential entry and firearm seizure. Written by Justice Clarence Thomas, the decision stated such conduct violated Fourth Amendment safeguards against unreasonable searches and property seizures. Key points. The court determined no expansive caretaking exemption exists for private residences. Law enforcement may still enter with proper authorization or genuine emergencies. The ruling draws sharp distinctions between automobiles and homes under Fourth Amendment jurisprudence. The court emphasized the residence receives maximum constitutional protection. This verdict effectively eliminated a hazardous legal gap. Prior to this case, lower tribunals had permitted broad constructions of police authority, something the court definitively rejected. Chapter 3. The Fourth Amendment. Restored in reality. For generations, the Fourth Amendment's protection had eroded through ambiguous judicial theories and uneven application, but this verdict reconfirms its core mission, shielding Americans from governmental invasion of their homes without proper procedure or a legitimate emergency rationale. Key points. Caniglia v. Strom reinforces the legal requirement for search authorization. The ruling narrows exceptions like mental wellness evaluations or check-in visits. Government agents must now observe more rigorous constitutional standards. This elevates the threshold for future firearm confiscation litigation across the country. Essentially, the verdict resurrects the Fourth Amendment. It communicates to enforcement agencies that procedural shortcuts justified by public safety will not validate constitutional breaches. Chapter 4. Coast-to-coast consequences for gun owners. Though this case began in Rhode Island, its ramifications extend to every state in the Union. The decision directly constrains how municipal police and state officials can handle mental health responses or domestic conflicts involving firearms. Jurisdictions with extreme risk protection orders or welfare check procedures now face examination. Key points. States must reform practices that depended on community caretaking reasoning. Extreme risk laws permitting residential entry without authorization may be unconstitutional. Firearm owners now possess stronger legal foundation to resist unlawful seizure. Law enforcement must demonstrate genuine danger or obtain judicial approval before proceeding. This transcends a mere court ruling. It's a warning shot. Gun owners throughout the nation now understand that possession within your residence receives constitutional protection, and removal demands due process. Chapter 5. State-level opposition and reinterpretation. Notwithstanding the decision, certain states are exploring innovative approaches to circumvent its impact. California, New York, Oregon, and other gun-restrictive jurisdictions are testing the boundaries of emergency exemption language to maintain warrantless firearm confiscation approaches, a strategy that may provoke additional litigation. Key points. California legislators are developing mental health crisis exceptions. New York employs expedited judicial orders to accelerate extreme risk removals. States are repackaging community caretaking under alternative labels. Second Amendment advocacy organizations are already organizing new lawsuits referencing this verdict. The battlefield has transformed. While the Supreme Court established a constitutional boundary, some jurisdictions attempt to redesign the landscape. But with this 9-0 precedent, constitutional challenges will likely intensify and succeed more frequently. Chapter 6. What this means for extreme risk protection orders. Extreme risk protection orders represent some of the most debated mechanisms used to provisionally confiscate firearms from individuals considered dangerous. But following the Supreme Court's unanimous ruling, the legal basis for enforcing those statutes, particularly without proper authorization, is starting to fracture. Key points. Most extreme risk statutes enable firearm seizure based on allegations, not convictions. Numerous states authorize residential entry without complete warrants under risk orders. This verdict contests any seizure not grounded in immediate peril or judicial procedure. Statutes, depending on unclear mental wellness rationales, may now violate the Constitution. The Caniglia ruling compels reconsideration of how extreme risk enforcement operates. Firearm owners now hold stronger constitutional grounds to challenge operations and removals that circumvent due process. Chapter 7. Law enforcement protocols must evolve. Police departments nationwide have historically trained officers under community caretaking principles, particularly during welfare evaluations or mental health responses. That framework is now dramatically restricted, demanding substantial revisions in enforcement procedures. Key points. Agencies must re-educate personnel on correct Fourth Amendment compliance. Officers cannot confiscate firearms during wellness evaluations without legitimate emergency circumstances. Permission or warrants become essential for entering private residences. Departments failing to modify risk litigation or evidence exclusion. This ruling isn't merely about legal proceedings. It concerns operational practice. Every officer, deputy, and agency must adjust to this constitutional recalibration or risk overstepping boundaries. Chapter 8. Potential growth through subsequent litigation. The Supreme Court's unanimous decision has already generated significant impact, but constitutional experts anticipate this is merely the starting point. Parallel cases in additional states, including Texas, Illinois, and California, are now citing Caniglia versus Strom as controlling precedent. Key points. Fresh litigation is examining the verdict's boundaries in broader gun-related confiscations. Appeals courts are referencing the case and rulings concerning residential searches. Some magistrates have already reversed firearm removals relying on this ruling. Second Amendment lawyers are creating momentum for expanded protections. This isn't a singular victory. It represents the initial domino in a sequence of legal battles that may redefine how state and federal authorities regulate firearm possession within residences. Chapter 9. Effects on veterans and mental wellness. Evaluations. Among the most neglected demographics affected by unconstitutional confiscations are military veterans, numerous whom encounter wellness evaluations due to PTSD or psychological concerns. In countless previous situations, firearms were seized from veterans without justification. Key points. Veterans face disproportionate targeting in mental health-related confiscations. The verdict supplies stronger legal protection for veterans against wrongful seizures. Veterans organizations are promoting awareness of protections under the Caniglia ruling. Situations involving VA notifications or medical wellness responses may now demand judicial authorization. This ruling helps eliminate a troubling gap that has impacted countless responsible veterans. It reinforces that service to the country doesn't surrender constitutional protections at home. Chapter 10. The road ahead for gun rights in America. The 9-0. Supreme Court verdict isn't the conclusion of this journey. It marks the start of a constitutional evolution. Now that the court has reestablished restrictions on warrantless residential intrusion and firearm confiscation, the struggle transitions to how lower tribunals, state lawmakers, and advocacy organizations advance this ruling. Key points. Second Amendment organizations are already leveraging this verdict in legal battles nationwide. States must now revamp policies permitting residential entry without authorization. Upcoming cases will probably extend the reach of this ruling into connected domains. Firearm owners must remain involved and comprehend their legal protections completely. This verdict provides Americans a constitutional safeguard, but that protection only functions when citizens understand how to employ it. Education, legal knowledge, and civic engagement are now the next front line. Every deputy, magistrate, and elected official must be held responsible to this new constitutional benchmark. The Second and Fourth Amendments have been validated, but their continuation will depend on what follows and how fiercely we protect them. A fresh chapter for constitutional rights has arrived. This ruling represents more than a procedural judgment. It stands as a forceful statement that the home remains protected, that freedoms must be respected, and that governmental authority has constraints. For years, the parameters of the Fourth Amendment were obscured by vague legal frameworks, but the Supreme Court has now redefined them clearly, unanimously, in supporting liberty. Firearm owners in every jurisdiction must stay vigilant, educated, and assertive. Your firearms aren't merely instruments of security. They represent a right the Constitution protects. This channel exists to guide you through that struggle. No partisan spin, no agenda, just the unfiltered constitutional reality that shapes your future. If this breakdown provided insight, smash that like button and distribute it with fellow freedom defenders. Because this isn't the conclusion of the narrative, it's the opening of a new phase in defending the Second and Fourth Amendments.